It is 4 a.m. and I'm drinking caffeine. I actually don't remember the last time I filmed a video before 12 p.m. So on one of our recent videos we had a comment that I found very interesting. So interesting that it inspired my longest ever response to a comment. It brought up something that I think a lot of people who are interested in personality type have wondered. So I thought I'd read this comment, I'd read my response, and if I'm not bored to death of my own voice, at the end of this video, I'll address some of the criticisms about MBTI and typology in general. I'm always fascinated by people on YouTube talking about this stuff. I have such a strong suspicion when it comes to the idea of discrete and predictable personality profiles. Maybe my zoom is set too high, or I have a bad baseline understanding of the types, because I just don't see it. I just see the contradictions. What makes you so certain of the legitimacy that you're willing to upload videos that thousands will watch? I really want it to be true, because it could potentially make navigating life so much easier. Still, I guess I wouldn't know how to confidently calibrate a baseline, if it is. Any thoughts? I'll be honest with you, since it seems like you're being sincere. Videos that thousands will watch gives lots of opportunities, so it seemed pragmatic to take the chance if people were interested in watching. I'm a pragmatist at heart, so I'll go with what works. So I'm very curious about this, and I'd like people to comment with their answers. Are you a person who follows your passions? You do the things that you like, regardless of whether you can become competent or good at them, or simply above average at them? Or are you someone who likes things because you are good at them, or could become good at them? Personally, I think I'm in the latter of those two. Also, in the comments, give an example of which hobbies or interests or skills you feel that way about. Okay, so the discrete personalities. Are the archetypes exact? No. Everyone can do everything. But it seems clear to me, from interacting with people in my daily life, watching current famous people, and studying interesting people from the past, that people have natural inclinations with how they approach the world. These can be turned into dichotomies. You're either this one or that one. Some people seek out variety in the way they think. Some people stick to the same things. Some don't plan and live in the moment. Others cannot help but constantly plan for the future, etc. Eye colour, hair colour, number of limbs, number of genders or sexes are discrete. There's hardly any variation between those things. I don't see why personality should necessarily be more complex. In DNA, 4 letters code for the genetic makeup of every organism that has ever lived on Earth, and perhaps many that live on other planets. 16 different personality types. In reality, there's probably a lot more. Actually seems like a huge amount. So I'll say one thing about the danger of making dichotomies. In the UK recently we had a referendum on Brexit. I say recently, I think it was like quite a few years ago, but we've talked about it ever since, so it feels very recent. Referendums, or referenda, are dangerous because they give you binary choices. Do you want to stay in the European Union or leave? If you actually sat down with each member of the public that voted, very few of them would be completely on the side of leave or remain. They float somewhere in the middle. That is why dichotomies are dangerous, forcing people to choose. However, despite the fact that most people are actually in the middle, if they have to make a choice, it is often very clear in their minds what the choice is. For example, a voter may be very unhappy with some things in the European Union, but they would never vote to leave. Although that level of subtlety and precision is lost when you dichotomize things, when you make them binary choices, when it comes down to it, people can actually be separated. The equivalent dilemma in typology is introversion and extroversion. Very few people will feel completely introverted or extroverted. In fact, you kind of can't be. But if you have to choose one, most people will strongly fall into one category or the other. Two people of the same general type, when you factor in upbringing, environmental factors, life experience, are going to be extremely different. However, the general ways they think and approach life will still be similar. Leonardo da Vinci seemed to me to be an ENTP personality type. One of my friends seems to be that too. They approach life in the same way, say similar things, have the same mindset, are naturally capable in areas that are the same. They also have similar weaknesses, whereas I don't share those commonalities. I can do those things, just like everyone is capable of anything. It's just that they are much more difficult for me and require much more conscious effort. One other criticism of personality type is that it is fundamentally restrictive. You're putting a label or category on someone and saying, you are this, therefore you cannot do these things. That is so dangerous and so untrue. Like I said, everyone can do everything, but to not acknowledge that some people have natural abilities in certain areas and some don't, I think is actually more limiting. I would rather have the approach where your natural weaknesses were found early on in life and someone said to you, listen, you're going to struggle more than most people in this area, so you're going to have to be smarter, more innovative, you're going to have to work harder. Many great things in life have been achieved and many great people defined by compensating for their weaknesses. Because when you're naturally good at something, you don't always have the incentive to work hard at it. So the moment that personality type or typology becomes a limiting label, that is when you should stop listening to whoever's saying that. Also, if someone is the same type as you, you're still going to be extremely different to them. It's not describing your personality, your individual personality. These are cognitive functions. These are preferences in the way you think about the world. If one person is a guitarist and the other person is a guitarist, it doesn't mean the music is going to be the same. It's just they bring in the same tool, the same instrument. When you think about identical twins that have literally the exact same genetic makeup, their personalities are entirely different. In the same way, you can have the same cognitive approach to life, the same personality type. It's probably badly named. You can have the same type and cognitive functions, yet have a very different personality to another person. Okay, so the word discrete has been mentioned a few times in that comment. So I did a biology degree. Did is a big word. I turned up to some lectures sometimes. And in biology you have discrete and continuous variables. Actually, it's not just biology, they're in many different fields and disciplines. They're classifications of variables. A variable is classified as discrete when it has a finite amount of ways it can manifest. So eye color, for example. Blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes. It's either one or the other. Then you have a continuous variable. That could be something like height. Someone could be 5 foot, then someone could be a tiny bit higher, and a tiny bit higher. You could be half a millimeter taller, or a quarter of a millimeter taller. There's a very wide spectrum, as opposed to a few distinct groups. One criticism of personality type is that personality is not a discrete variable. It must be continuous. It's simply too complex to be discrete. You can't have these neat little categories of personality. So I can see the logic behind that argument. However, even if that's true, people still have priorities and things they neglect. In personality theory, you have what is known as a dominant cognitive function. It's like the main way you approach the world. As a result, the opposite function of that gets repressed and becomes your inferior function. If you are highly career orientated, it's possible that that will result in your family life being neglected. If you are a stay-at-home parent for 20 years, you might find it hard to sustain a career. If you can do both, amazing. But what you focus on in life will by definition neglect its opposite. So to say personality is continuous where you have a bit of this trait, a bit of that trait, you're good at these two, it starts to fall apart a little bit because there's always going to be a hierarchy of skills that you have. You're always going to be better at something than another thing. You're always going to be more focused on a certain thing and more neglectful of another. It might be the case that in childhood, when you're growing up, your personality is continuous. It is not decided. Yet it becomes a discrete variable over time. It becomes fixed or set. Now, that's a little bit controversial because as a piano and guitar teacher, I have a lot of older students who are always worried about, am I too old to learn? And in my experience, despite everything that's said about the neuroplasticity of young people and the capacity to learn things easily like languages, I have found that there isn't really a difference between how quickly a child or an older person can learn. However, there are certain things in childhood that do seem to become set. If someone could verify what I'm about to say in the comments, that would be great. But I've heard that if you listen to certain types of music, like jazz music when you're younger, you are much more likely to find it harmonious in your adulthood. Whereas if you don't listen to jazz music, or you're not exposed to it, you will probably find it very unpleasant, or at least not pleasant to listen to. There's a funny thing that's happening with hip-hop at the moment where the older generations think it sounds like nothing, and generations of young people coming up find it very melodic and rhythmic and harmonious. Maybe personality type is like that. It's something that is in flux for a long period of time, and through the course of your life it starts to become set. Maybe that is set biologically, or who knows, maybe you can change personality. Most people in typology will say you can't change personality over time, but maybe you can. Maybe it's just something that becomes an extremely ingrained habit. Another criticism of the personality types is that they are simply too vague, too overly generalized. That is an entirely fair criticism. However, have you ever heard a description of someone's personality that is not a little bit vague or overgeneralized to a certain extent? I mean, I am actually happy to play by those rules. If you describe someone to me as intelligent, that's fine. I just want to see their IQ test results. I want to see how long it took them to do the test. I want guarantees that it was done under invigilated experimental conditions. I want to compare their result to the average of the population, and then we can decide whether they're intelligent. The IQ debate is a debate for another day. If you describe someone to me as emotional and sensitive and empathic, then I want to see the test results for when you sat them down, put a scanner on their head that shows the parts of their brain responsible for empathy, if we can localize the brain to that extent, lighting up like a Christmas tree in response to images of needy people. Then I will dub the sensitive and empathic. If you want to be that pedantic about describing people's personality, then maybe we should refrain from describing people's personality at all, even in daily life. Personality is a mind-bendingly complex thing. Every description, every archetype is going to be overly generalized. It's going to miss certain things. It just comes with the territory. That is why it would be really nice if the skeptical people were actually involved more, because these cognitive functions have not been proven scientifically. And it's good for everyone in the typology community to basically acknowledge and come to terms with that. In the same way that someone describes a person as intelligent because they've observed them doing things they think are intelligent, that is what we do with the cognitive functions. There's this description of a cognitive function, and this person seems to be demonstrating this in their life. Therefore, we say they have that function. It's reasonable, but it's still not scientific. Almost done. Your skepticism is justified because pseudoscience is becoming ever more prevalent. But in truth, from my experience and my knowledge of the different roles humans perform, from our history as being members of smaller tribes, these personality archetypes are at the very least extremely useful to understand people. Perhaps they will even be justified in a measurable scientific way in the future. Although I'm certain many flaws and inaccuracies with the current way we all think about this topic will be revealed. I don't know if anything I just said made sense. And I actually can't even remember what this video was about. Yet, somehow, I still think you should subscribe.